Chapter 17. Confinement 1-4. Chapter 9. Confinement 1995. 1996. Percy is 19 and 32. Severus is 34. Harry is 15. The Dark Lord is, by some accounts, 1 June 1995. The Dark Lord has returned. Percy shivers to think of it as England rolls out a flurry of misty rain and crashing thunderstorms to introduce a summer crackling with quiet electricity before subsiding into long, languorous days of unrelenting, oppressive heat. After Percy's argument with his parents, he avoids the burrow, and all of his siblings ignore him, save for Charlie and occasionally Ginny. The twins are definitely up to something, Ginny writes to him. They've come into some money or something, probably gambling on Harry in the tournament. Lots of explosions in their room, and they won't let me join in. Ron is quiet and spends ages sitting in his room, writing something, but Dad's forbidden him from writing to Harry. Dumbledore's orders. So I think he might be writing to Hermione. Should I tell Ron that he likes her, do you think, or let him figure it out on his own? Percy snorts, reading Ginny's letter in the echoing silence of his flat over a bracing cup of tea. He's very pleased to not be at home, of course, he is, but he misses Ginny sometimes. He has no doubt Ron's infatuation with Hermione Granger is obvious to all of the other Weasleys, but if he's remembering the particulars of his brother's love life correctly, Ron is destined to blunder through several more years of misfortune. We're leaving the burrow soon. Heading to Redacted. Just kidding. I don't actually know. I don't think Dad knows either. Guess we'll see when we arrive. After that, no post, so don't do anything stupid now that you are persona non grata as far as the Weasleys are involved. At least not where I can't see. Mum is furious at you, but she'll come around, Percy. You know what she's like. At the bottom of the letter, cramped and squeezed under Ginny's flowery signature, she adds, Perce, is he Tom, do you think? He sighs, rolling the letter carefully into a scroll and casting a light preservation charm on it. Is he indeed? Percy doesn't think so. If the Dark Lord remembered everything he did as Tom, Percy wouldn't doubt that he would have checked on all of the Horcruxes as soon as he could. Not to mention, he'd probably come for Percy, wouldn't he? Not that Percy was that meaningful to Tom. But Tom would come for him, wouldn't he, if he remembered? Dear Ginny, be safe, please. No, I'm not lecturing you, but if he is back, and no matter what Harry says, Ginny, think logically. Do not accept anyone's words blindly, even mine. He may be back, but he may be a shade, or a corruption, or a reincarnation effort gone wrong, or even a very skilled impersonator. It does not make him any less dangerous, but it may make him less straightforward. Assume nothing. If he is back, then you will be in danger. We will all be in danger as long as the Weasleys are known to shelter Harry Potter, and even if we were to cast him out to the streets now, just on the basis of our past association. Here he pauses, wordlessly evaporating the ink that falls from his quill before it hits the parchment without thinking of it, an old habit from his Hogwarts days. Nobody is reading his post yet. This may be the last time he has a chance to communicate with Ginny honestly. Ginny, I think whatever the truth is, there will be dangerous times ahead. You are young, but you are not stupid. Learn to protect yourself, please. Question what you hear. Be safe. Don't leave evidence about. Don't draw attention to yourself. Don't be rash or reckless. Always think of the implications of your actions. This may drag on for years. It isn't a schoolyard battle to be defeated in a blaze of light. These next few years may change all of our lives for good, for better, for worse, or in ways we could never have anticipated. Do not react hastily to things or with unnecessary emotion, but be calm and think ahead. Ron can be rash. Harry can be rash. I do not know Hermione very well, but I imagine she too can be rash. We all can, really. But I know you, Ginny, and you have a brilliant mind. Use it, and always remember that if we are headed into war, then it is a war we are facing, not merely a battle. There are no points gained for wars half won, remember. What I said on the train will always be true. Percy, he may not be Tom, but if he is, he'll want you, Ginny. Be cautious. Go nowhere alone. Find people you trust. Learn all the magic you can. Destroy this letter. He has a vague idea of writing to Ron, but the thought exhausts him, and so he whistles for Hermes and gives only one letter to be delivered. Crouch continues to improve in health by, well, not by leaps and bounds, but at least by steps in the right direction. Percy feels that whoever imperiused or poisoned Crouch, presumably to get access to the tournament, likely has bigger problems to contend with now and no more use for the man. Percy would still like to know who was responsible, of course, but he does not think it the most pressing issue that he has to investigate, given it likely was just a Death Eater who is now off gallivanting with the Dark Lord. He continues to watch Crouch carefully, but the brush with Crumb in the tournament has calmed Percy some, or at least given him more confidence in his abilities to detect the imperious. Crouch's magic feels perfectly fine whenever Percy extends his own to check, though the sour notes of wine in Crouch's magical signature deepen as the summer goes on, hot and heavy. In truth, Percy has to think carefully about whether he wants to leave his position as Crouch's primary assistant. The Department of International Magical Cooperation could be very useful in a war, and it feels good, in a way, to be doing something meaningful to contribute to the war effort, as nascent as it may be. Each report that Percy compiles feels like a small stone in the wall against the Dark Lord, but Percy ultimately decides to apply for the position of junior assistant to the ministry when it becomes open. Crouch informs Percy that he's far too valuable of an employee to lose to Fudge without a fight, but he'll deign to share Percy with Fudge on a part-time basis if Percy truly wishes to attach himself to a man unlikely to last the year as minister. Well, you see, Mr. Crouch, it's junior assistant to the minister, not to Mr. Fudge, Percy quips innocently, and he's rewarded with perhaps the first laugh he's ever coaxed from Crouch, albeit grudging. It's a bit of an unorthodox arrangement that may have raised some eyebrows if anyone dared to get too close to Fudge these days. Fudge is truly odious, of course, but close up, Percy is struck by how lost the other man is, how often he lashes out, how reviled he is making himself in the upper echelons of society, many of whom have their own private opinion about whether the Dark Lord has truly returned. But it matters not if Fudge is acting out of an erratic combination of fear and suspicion and anger, because there's another person reading the signs of what to come and positioning themselves appropriately. Madam Umbridge, Percy says politely, giving her a short but formal bow. She looks up from her desk, where she's using a very large and pink quill to write what is undoubtedly a scathing letter to someone. The ink drips messily off the end of the quill, and she murmurs a harsh charm. The splatter sizzles off the page. Not Percy's preferred approach, but effective nevertheless. Mr. Weasley, she responds, giving him an appraising look. I had the pleasure of meeting your father yesterday. Percy smiles tightly. My father and I do not speak often, he replies, hoping she will read between the lines and reach a favorable conclusion. In fact, it would be more accurate to say we hardly speak at all. Her gaze turns assessing. I see. I wanted to give you this, he says before she can say anything else. With another short bow, he hands over a neatly bound scroll written out in his very best handwriting. She unrolls it with another abrupt tap of her wand, the ribbon wilting into slivers. She scans it with quick, short movements and then looks up at him with an air of exaggerated surprise. Why, Mr. Weasley, this is unexpected. Forgive my impertinence, ma'am, he responds smartly, but I had a feeling you may be turning your attention to Hogwarts, and I wanted to give you my perceptions as a recent Hogwarts graduate. He'd spent the night writing out his suggestions for ways Hogwarts could improve, and only a few of them were meant specifically to appeal to Umbridge. There are many ways Hogwarts could improve, and he may as well take this opportunity to fell two pixies with a single spell. And why would you believe I may be turning my attention to Hogwarts? Everyone knows Dumbledore is a threat to the Ministry, he says, widening his eyes as if surprised she would even ask. And a threat to the Ministry is a threat to us all. A threat to the very order of our society. Any of us doing our duty would rush to right the wrongs of our education system before they afflict any more young, vulnerable minds. Well, he is laying it on a bit thick, but Umbridge's smile is slow, almost like honey. Cedric, for reasons unknown to the general populace, but rather more obvious to Percy, deigns to take an apprenticeship offer from Professor Sprout, thus becoming the first Hogwarts apprentice since McGonagall. Percy reads the announcement in the Daily Prophet and scowls despite himself. He has a suspicion that Dumbledore set Cedric up for this. Certainly, Cedric did not have any particular aptitude for herbology, as Percy remembers it, and if he'd been truly serious about seeking an apprenticeship, It would have been wrapped up by the end of seventh year, rather than hastily announced right before term. But the idea of the Hogwarts champion returning as an apprentice makes for good headlines, and Percy can imagine that Cedric wanted to stay close to the castle after the trials of last year. Certainly, Cedric would be a great recruitment tool for coercing young, impressionable students into joining the Order. At least he'll be there to keep an eye on Ron, Percy counsels himself. This year under Umbridge is the year much went wrong at Hogwarts, never to be repaired. Percy can't say he's upset that level-headed, capable Cedric will be at the castle, but he wishes there was a bit less fanfare about it. Percy receives the news from his mother. Smug, he daresays, the only correspondence he receives from her all summer, that Ron has been appointed a prefect with only slightly less composure. The twins actually write him a short note as well, reassuring him that Percy was all but a prefect in his own right, due to his insistence on evangelizing the rules to anyone with the misfortune to be nearby. And there aren't any prizes to be won for being forcibly conscripted into the oppressive judicial system imposed by the professors of Hogwarts. This note actually makes Percy snort, and he keeps it with the other scant letters he has received from his other siblings, though the letter from his mother meets the bad end of his wand. August 1995. The Greengrass Summer Ball is a lavish, glittering affair. Percy and Aunt Muriel purchase special robes for the affair, but even the knowledge that he is impeccably dressed does not quell the anxious murmurs in his stomach. Percy has never been to a formal affair before, not to mention a summer ball where there are human servants. "Stand up straight, boy," Aunt Muriel hisses to him as they wait in line to pay their compliments to the hosts. "You've every right to be here, especially now that you're the Prewett heir." Percy straightens obediently. They inch closer to the Greengrasses. Landon, sandwiched between his parents, looks tall and regal and dashing. Percy suddenly feels very certain that his dark blue robes are entirely the wrong color for summer. Landon is wearing a light gray, and in the deepening dusk he seems to shimmer, whereas Percy feels more liable to melt into the background. When they reach the hosts, Percy executes the complicated bow he'd practiced, and out of the corner of his eye, he sees Landon nod just slightly in approval. "Lord Greengrass, I thank you for this opportunity to light our wands together in celebration of a new summer." "I thank you for honoring it," Tobias responds crisply, inclining his head. "Tobias!" Aunt Muriel greets Lord Greengrass effusively, foregoing a bow entirely. Percy blinks at the informality of Tobias, and even Landon looks askance at his father. Tobias doesn't flinch. He takes Muriel's gnarled hands in his own and kisses them warmly. "Muriel, I have been impressed with your heir. Rather like Gideon, isn't he?" Muriel says approvingly, gripping Percy's arm tightly. Something passes behind Tobias' eyes, but the emotion is too complex and fleeting for Percy to name. Indeed, as they walk away, Percy throws his aunt a questioning glance. "Tobias was great friends with Gideon," she says casually, as if it were not a revelation. "They spent summers at my house sometimes. They were both in Ravenclaw, of course. Fabian was in Gryffindor, as was Marley, but Gideon considered himself studious. Drove Fabian mad. He was always up for a bit of a lark, but Gideon was more cautious." Percy pictures Landon's father being close friends with his uncle and shakes his head. Sometimes he wishes he had been allowed to be in Ravenclaw, able to escape the stultifying isolation of Gryffindor. Did Gideon and Tobias part ways, unable to agree on their stance on Tom Riddle, or had they merely drifted apart after Hogwarts? Percy finds to his surprise that he is greeted by many of the attendees, several of whom compliment him on his promotion to the junior assistant of the minister. It warms him, all of these rich and prominent purebloods keeping tabs on his career. Aunt Muriel is in her element. It surprises him, watching her entertain group after group. She knows all of the gossip for the last 70 years at least, and in this crowd at least, her dramatic retellings of sordid stories seems to play well. Percy remembers always being a bit embarrassed at Aunt Muriel at various social functions, but though he'd thought the group of purebloods would be a haughty lot, they all laugh uproariously as Aunt Muriel slyly eviscerates each one. Perhaps it is the air of intimacy that the ball creates, the esprit de corps born from being privileged and wealthy. He finds everyone to be surprisingly friendly and in some cases nearly gregarious. I am glad to see you are enjoying yourself, Tobias says quietly at his elbow, nearly 2 hours into the affair. Percy flinches despite himself. He had not heard Tobias approach. The other man chuckles softly. One ought to be aware, Mr. Weasley, particularly at an event like this. Tobias skillfully leads them both through a set of doors into a small private room, which he locks and wards efficiently. Percy watches him warily. I shall make this brief. You're making quite the impact at this party, Mr. Weasley, and I would hate to keep you from it, Tobias says, beginning without preamble. What happened at the end of the tournament? Percy blinks, thrown. What do you mean? I have heard the rumors, of course. Do you believe them to be true? Percy furrows his brows, not sure how to respond, and Tobias laughs, a short bark. I do not have the time to dance around the topic, Mr. Weasley. I am sure you appreciate my need for accurate information, given what we spoke of last. I shall speak even more plainly. Is he back? Percy purses his lips. Part of him knows he ought to claim ignorance, but the other part of him thinks of what is to come and knows it will be safer for Landon if Tobias knows the truth. I believe he may be, says Percy carefully. Much is not known, but I think it may be pragmatic to assume the unbelievable has occurred. Tobias sighs, seeming to deflate before Percy's eyes. We must leave, he murmurs to himself. He will not be content if I do not answer the call. You must know, though, Percy says suddenly, his eyes flicking to Tobias' left arm. Tobias shakes his head. I was never mocked, he says. I did not correct your assumption last, though I will do so now. He wanted me, but my father claimed me as his heir and set me to managing the business. I had no time to fulfill any rebellious urges I may have had. Percy hesitates, but he cannot help himself, and then blurts out, You were friends with my uncle. Tobias sighs long and in some ways longing. Gideon was the best friend I ever had, he says simply. But friendship is not always enough when you are young and angry and filled with visions of your own glory. Percy understands that quite thoroughly. I am to this day in my father's debt, for he saw what was coming and ensured I would take no part in it, continues Tobias. I will do the same for my son. You think Landon would be tempted? Percy asks dubiously, thinking of his bookish, excitable friend. Tobias smiles thinly. I do not fear that my son will be tempted. I fear he will not be given the opportunity to choose otherwise. You should know that about him, Percy. He takes what he believes he deserves, and once he has you, he does not let go. Percy shivers, thinking suddenly of all of those serious pureblood heirs that had presented him formally with welcome when he had become the heir of the Prowett family. Some had been from dark families, but all certainly would come to the Dark Lord's attention for one reason or another. He suddenly does not envy them their prominence in society. You can't say anything, Percy says, leaning forward urgently. I can't explain why, but it is very important that he not know that we know. Tobias nods thoughtfully. I suppose Crouch has some sort of plan in place. Nobody hates him more than Crouch, save Moody, perhaps. I do not know what the plan is, says Percy, entirely truthfully. Neither man has seen it fit to confide in Percy what they intend to do with the knowledge that the Dark Lord has returned. But I believe nothing good can come if he knows there is one. I will reveal nothing. Tobias looks intently at Percy. I have news for you as well, in return. The house of which you seek is in a town called Little Hangleton. Once a busy wizarding establishment, it is now primarily a muggle town. I do not dare go myself, and I could find no photographs, but my sources tell me the last known location of the last known heir of the family we last spoke is definitely in that town. Percy could not say whether Tobias is speaking of Tom or Morphin, but he supposes it does not matter in the end. But Tobias cannot be right. Little Hangleton is where the Riddle family plot is, the Riddle mansion. There was no Gaunt mansion there. Of course, perhaps the Gaunt mansion is so well hidden that Percy would have missed it. It would make sense for the Gaunts to live in the same area as the Riddles. How else would Merope Gaunt meet Tom Riddle? Percy will have to return to the area and investigate more thoroughly. It was silly of him to assume the Gaunt family manor would be out in the open, vulnerable to a light wizard poking around for answers. Thank you, Percy says, sweeping a low bow. He's been practicing his bows all summer. This one says, according to the tilt of his head and the position of his arms, that he is in gratitude but not debt to the other person. Tobias hesitates. And another piece of advice for free. I have said this before, but Percy, stay away from whatever is happening if you can. He is not one to trifle with, nor attempt any sort of mischief under his notice. Which is, of course, precisely why Percy needs to finish his mischief as soon as humanly possible. Fudge comes in one day toward the end of summer bristling with anticipation. "We've got him," he announces to the office at large, which consists primarily of Percy and the secretary, a young woman named Mathilda, who has already crisply informed Percy that she deigned to take a secretarial position only because it furthers her career goals and will not be completing any work for anyone other than the minister himself. Percy rather likes Mathilda, but he does not think she particularly likes him. Mathilda instantly drops her usual scowl and bats her eyelashes at the minister. Percy gives her a look behind Fudge's back, which she ignores without a flinch. Mathilda had not existed in the last timeline, at least in close proximity to Percy, but Percy thinks Fudge hired her when Crouch only agreed to have Fudge have Percy 3 days of the week. It makes his pay stubs a nightmare to process, but it allows him to remain close to both men, so Percy thinks it is mostly worth the hassle. Who? Harry Potter, of course. Fudge is wearing one of his interview robes, dark green to match his bowler hat, shiny black shoes, white ruffled shirt. His mustache gleams, newly combed. It's a look worthy of Rita Skeeter, but she's been oddly silent, so Percy makes a mental note to read the prophet tomorrow to see if there's anything other than the usual nonsense. Underage magic, Fudge announces, as if he'd revealed Harry Potter was on trial for murder. In his muggle neighborhood. Can you imagine? Percy wants to roll his eyes, but Fudge is beaming at him expectantly, so he only nods and tries to look enthused. He's a reckless child, I've always said that. Daring to flout the ministry like that, contributes Mathilda, not to be outdone. Minister, it is an outrage. Certainly it is, Fudge says, bestowing upon her a rather sickeningly sweet smile. And don't you worry, dear, we'll get him off the streets. Percy sees the edges of Mathilda's smile twitch, but to her credit, she does not break her facade. Weasley, you'll be attending. Take good notes. That blasted bones woman is already trying to argue we shan't need a trial for such an egregious mistake. She's angling for minister already, even though elections aren't for 2 years. But she's backing the wrong centaur with Potter. Fudge rubs his hands together in satisfaction and steps into his office without providing any additional details. Mathilda sags back to her desk and glares at him. Have fun at the trial, she says nastily. Have fun sitting here doing nothing, Percy says cheerfully back. He knows this time that Fudge only keeps him close to artlessly pry about Harry, but in both timelines he is not above using Fudge's attention for his own purposes. The trial is not fun, however. Harry looks older and cleaner than when Percy saw him last, as if he'd shot up over the last few months. He doesn't know where Harry's been for the rest of the summer, but he can guess that he spent at least the last night wherever the infamous Black family residence may be, under the tender ministrations of Marley Weasley. Harry's hair is cut, parted and combed. He's wearing clean robes, though his muggle trainers are smudged, as usual, and his face has been scrubbed so hard Percy can still see a faint glow on his cheeks. But the expression on his face, mulish and determined, is all Harry, no matter what appearance to the contrary he is trying to project. He looks terribly small, standing there all alone as the full body of the Wizengamot gathers itself. He doesn't seem to notice Percy, and Percy does not draw attention to himself. He hears some of the members mutter to themselves and privately agrees with their irritation. A full trial just for underage magic. For anyone other than Harry Potter, they'd be given a small fine and perhaps a strict talking to, but hardly any special attention. Dumbledore is late, striding in at the last possible moment. Fudge seems to wilt in his seat, but recovers quickly. Dumbledore claims the trial was rescheduled, but it's been on Percy's planner since yesterday afternoon. Perhaps it is merely a ploy to paint himself as Harry's savior. Certainly Harry brightens considerably when Dumbledore comes banging into the room, watching him snap at the minister with wide, fond eyes. Yes, yes. Only Dumbledore is there for Harry. Never the ministry, never any other adults, only Albus Dumbledore. But critically, Harry will always feel alone at the beginning of his ordeals. He must trust absolutely in Dumbledore, but not rely on him. Percy snorts to himself and presses more viciously on the parchment than is absolutely necessary, nearly breaking the nib of his quill. Harry gets off, of course, cleared of all charges. The trial is clearly a farce. If they'd really meant to charge Harry with something specific, then it would take more than a squib's testimony to have all the charges dismissed. Even Fudge couldn't possibly believe a Patronus charm would be so damning as to expel Harry Potter, even despite the smear campaign that plays out daily in the papers. Likely his plan is merely to continue to discredit Harry, paint him as reckless and wild. Harry chases Dumbledore out of the cavernous room, though Dumbledore walks away even faster, and Percy sighs, gathering up the transcript. Umbridge stalks over to Fudge, who flushes ruddy at the sight of her incensed face. Percy follows them discreetly out of the chamber, hoping to overhear their conversation. "Did you see him?" Percy flinches and spins, flicking his wrist to activate his wand holster, but it's only Crouch, nearly invisible next to a large golden statue of Percy, checks the inscription, the first Chief Warlock. He sends a regretful glance to the disappearing figures of Umbridge and Fudge, and then turns to face Crouch. "Harry Potter, sir." Crouch nods. "How does he look?" They begin to make their way toward the Department of International Magical Cooperation, dodging the multitude of red-frocked Wisengamot members, huddling like birds in the small atrium. "Angry," Percy replies when they're out of sight. "Must be difficult to be him right now." And with Dumbledore barely coming to his defense, Crouch agrees, shaking his head. "I wonder what he's planning." It is true that Dumbledore has not said anything publicly, save for his speech at the end of last year to the students that was reprinted in full in the Prophet. Certainly, he's planning something. "You do not know," Percy gives Crouch a sideways look. "I do not speak to Dumbledore. Rumor has it your entire family is under his protection," Crouch says dryly, raising an eyebrow. "You are saying that does not extend to you." Percy's face sours, and he begins to walk more quickly. "I've spoken to Dumbledore maybe once or twice in my entire life," he says defensively. "Whatever protections he extends my family are due to their own affairs." Crouch looks around and leans in. His breath is warm and wet on Percy's cheek. "You have not been asked to join his order." Percy is momentarily surprised, though he supposes that of course the old guard knows about the Order of the Phoenix. Likely it came out during the trials after the last war, trials which Crouch would have presided over. But if it is common knowledge that his family is under Dumbledore's purview, does that offer them protections or merely paint targets on their backs? Is it good for strangers to assume the same of Percy, or does he need to make it clear where his loyalties lie? "No," Percy responds truthfully, striving for an even voice that would not betray his resentment. "I have not been asked to join." "Neither have I," reveals Crouch, "though I expect Alastair has. I thought he may want to coordinate some sort of strategy, but he is more paranoid than usual. What is the point of a secret order if everyone can guess who may be in it?" Although it is surprising to Percy that Crouch had not been approached, at least by Moody. Any man willing to send his own son to life in Azkaban for being a Death Eater would certainly be useful to the cause, or at least unlikely to betray it. September 1995. The next few weeks are a haze of drafting Fudge's interviews, attempting to ingratiate himself with Umbridge, and balancing Crouch's ever-increasing demands. Percy finds it uncomfortably easy to compose pithy comments or harsh condemnations for the minister to parrot during his daily briefings, but he reassures himself that none of Fudge's bluster really comes to anything in the end. Percy does write a letter to Harry when he hears that he received a detention in his very first class with Umbridge. "Keep your head down," he counsels. "It is better to make allies quietly than to make enemies publicly. Without proof, your story is backed only by your word, and your word is nothing short of unreliable." Given that Harry continues to loudly rail against Umbridge, Percy thinks that his letter did not make very much impact, but at least he tried to rein in their chosen one, which is more than anyone in his family seems to be doing. And though mist curls over the British moors, and muggles report strange incidents, and the weather grows dark and unpredictable, the Dark Lord is not really doing anything in particular. Nevertheless, Tonks is exceedingly busy, or so the lack of owls from her would imply. Percy tries to not be annoyed. 3 years ago he'd barely written to her for an entire year, and she'd forgiven him with only minimal irritation. He only wishes he knew what she was doing, or even where she was, for he dropped in on her office more than once to see it cold and empty, leftover food wilting in the corner, the preservation charm long extinguished. Moody's office looks much the same. When Percy finally meets Tonks for lunch, she doesn't apologize, merely greeting him brightly, as if it had only been a week rather than several months since he last saw her. She looks stressed, tired and thin, but nevertheless exhilarated, sporting lurid pink hair in a jaunty cut. He squints at her face. Makeup, if he had to guess. "Have you been seeing anyone?" Percy asks casually. Tonks looks up, momentarily pausing in her decimation of 2 turkey sandwiches, one in each hand. Percy, by contrast, has been merely picking at the wilted lettuce that even a freshening charm can't enliven. "I see people all the time." Percy rolls his eyes. "Number seeing someone, you know." She gives him a mischievous smile. "Oh, in the biblical sense, you mean." Percy is not religious, but he can infer the reference well enough to blush. "I'm honored you think I have the time to get laid," Tonks says cheerfully. "Why? Am I exuding some sort of blessed glow?" "That's what the girls in my dorm would always say when someone got shagged. Look at you, you're glowing." She mimics the last in a high-pitched tone, widening her eyes suggestively at Percy. "Not necessarily getting shagged," Percy says with a cough. "Just seeing someone, going on dates." "Well, I spend most of my time with Moody, but he is single," Tonks says musingly. "Do you think that counts?" "Where have you been spending your time?" Percy counters, dropping the topic for now. He has absolutely no idea how Tonks falls in love with Remus Lupin, but he supposes it must happen fairly soon. They'll be married within the year, if he remembers correctly, with a child on the way in too. Maybe they're already practicing their caretaking skills on Sirius Black. In 2 years, Tonks will be a mother. Many in the wizarding world marry young, but Tonks is 21 or 22. He can't quite remember off the top of his head. He watches her tear the crusts off her sandwich with her hands and cannot conceptualize how she becomes a mother before 25. Percy is significantly older than that if one counts both timelines, and he barely feels qualified to take care of a partner, let alone a child. "The London house, of course," Tonks says, waggling her eyebrows. "I was surprised never to see you there, you know." "I was never invited." She blinks at him. "What? Of course you were." "There's more rooms there than for all of us combined. Honestly, Sirius would welcome the company, what with Remus off half the time trying to find some werewolves to woo." "I was never invited," he repeats, irritated. Tonks pauses and looks at him more carefully. "To the house, or to," he drops his voice, "to the order. Are you serious?" Her clear incredulity, rather than mollifying his feelings, only serves to irritate him even more. "Dumbledore didn't want me." "I don't know how more clear I can be." "You've got to be mistaken," Tonks says, shaking her head. "Honestly, Percy, your whole family, all of us, I mean, well, how could you not be? The only reason you wouldn't be one of us is if you're one of them." For one terrible second he sees doubt in her eyes. "Well, Dumbledore must think I'm one of them because I'm certainly not one of you," he says nastily, standing. "Enjoy wooing Remus." "Percy, wait, what?" He navigates his way out of the cafeteria with quick, sure steps, his heart beating. He knows rationally that it is not Tonks' fault that nobody is very interested in soliciting his help, but equally so, he cannot forget the look in her eyes as she questioned whether he may be one of them. Percy wonders if Tonks had been asked to put her inheritance toward the Order, or whether that would be considered double dipping in the Black Vault. As Percy strides back towards his office, Jamila Jellens, Rita Skeeter's fervent enemy, sidles out from behind a stack of shelves, her distinctive black hair partially hidden behind a jaunty cap. "Mr. Weasley," she purrs. "Just the man I was hoping to see." "Mrs. Jellens," he says coolly. "What can I do for you?" She gives him an appraising look. "Do you have a minute?" Percy does not say anything in the Prophet that Fudge has not already said in interviews based on Percy's notes, but the impact of his words ripples far beyond what he would have thought. Fred and George write him another letter, considerably less friendly than the last. There's being ambitious, and there's being a traitor, Percy. He catches several of his colleagues whispering about him, huddled around desks, and he receives a memo on scented pink paper asking him to tea when Umbridge returns briefly from Hogwarts next Wednesday. His father, to Percy's eternal embarrassment, confronts him in the office, in clear eyesight of several ministry employees, including Mr. Crouch. In what is a pathetic revision of the fight they'd had the first time around. The issue, Arthur explains in a very loud and agitated whisper, is not that Percy is praising Dolor's Umbridge, but rather that he is criticizing Albus Dumbledore. He needs our support, Percy, Arthur says urgently. Percy throws up a privacy ward, though he can't prevent his colleagues from watching them intently. The bullpen in the Department of International Magical Cooperation is much more crowded than the quiet, sparse inner office of the minister. He needs your support, perhaps, Percy agrees, but he certainly doesn't need mine. He'll let you in, I've already spoken to him. It was a rather bad show to refuse to give the money, but there's plenty you could do, Arthur says, dropping his voice. Percy sniffs. He knows, logically, that he should just swallow his pride and go be Dumbledore's little lapdog for the sake of the greater good, but some old instinct stiffens his spine and lends a snap to his tone. There's nothing I wish to do. This is my job, Father, my career. Dumbledore hasn't done a single thing for me, and I'm hardly going to throw away what may be my only chance at success, because he wants to run his school like the personal training grounds for Harry. Here Percy drops his voice too. And if he is back, and I'm not saying he's not, then Dumbledore has to decide whether he wants to run an army or a school. It can't be both. Arthur seems to finally realize the need for discretion and tugs Percy down the hall and into a small supply closet. He is back, Percy, his father says seriously, and we all need to be prepared. I am prepared, Percy says, thinking of a portrait hanging in his room that is nearly done. All that's left is the potion, really. He just needs to get back to Hogwarts and enlist Snape for the final part. My methods of preparation may differ from yours, but that does not mean I am not thinking ahead. It's not just about you, Percy. It's the whole family. We need to stick together. We can stick together without me slavishly following Dumbledore, Percy insists. And anyways, oughtn't we have some sort of spy in the ministry? We have spies, snaps Arthur. We need you to look after your family. I could say the same about you. Ron's got a bloody big target on his back, and what about Ginny? What about you, Percy? Dumbledore told us you wrote in that diary too. Percy stops, chest heaving, and looks at his father. Days of painting his face, focusing on the lines of his cheeks and the way his eyebrow tufts, has given Percy an insight into his father's features that is at times startlingly intimate. I can take care of myself, father. They stand, silent in the way that settles awkwardly after a fight has lost its steam. I know you, Percy, says his father after a beat. I know you are a good person, and you are brave, and you care for this family. I know it is not always easy for you to feel like a part of this family, but don't get swayed by promises of promotions or glory. None of those things matter in the end, not really. Percy is incensed all over again at the condescension. I'm an adult, he says, with the weight of 2 lives behind his words. I can make up my own mind about what matters to me. Is it too much to ask for your support? Arthur sighs heavily. Support goes both ways, Percy. Lucius Malfoy also shows up at his desk, but at a time when Percy is working on something for Fudge. He stands silently in the doorway until Mathilda notices him. Her loud cough startles Percy out of his concentration right in the middle of a sentence. Lord Malfoy, he exclaims, jumping to his feet. His quill, hastily discarded, smears ink over the draft, but Percy tries to ignore it. He gives a short bow. Lucius surveys him. Mr. Weasley, are you here for Minister Fudge? But it proves unnecessary for Percy to say anything else, as Fudge appears instantly with the instincts of a career politician. Ah, Lucius, he says heartily. I suppose you are here to talk about the new Aura Division. New Aura Division. Lucius smiles thinly. I am afraid not, Minister. I am here for your assistant. Fudge looks between Percy and Mathilda, clearly debating whether a woman or a blood traitor would be more likely to be of interest to Lucius Malfoy. Mathilda's smile is fixed. Percy reckons she doesn't want to be Lucius' target for any of the reasons that Fudge imagines she is. Mr. Weasley is a charge of mine, Lucius says smoothly. I am sponsoring him, of course. It is difficult to say which of the 3 members of the audience is more flabbergasted by that news. Percy recovers quickly. I appreciate all that you do, Lord Malfoy. Right, of course, Fudge says, looking at Percy with new interest. Weasley is a bright chap, sure to do great things. I hadn't realized your interest in him, Lucius. It is nascent, I admit, Lucius drawls. He nods his head at Percy. Come, Mr. Weasley, we have much to discuss. Their journey through the ministry is definitely calculated to pass the greatest number of departments. Percy wants to cringe as heads turn and mouths gape at Percy's shock of red hair next to Lucius' blonde mane. His father will definitely hear about this, and Percy doesn't think he's up for another fight with Arthur Weasley, particularly one over Lucius. "Stand straight, boy," Lucius hisses out of the corner of his mouth. Percy straightens obediently, though the tips of his ears turn red at the admonishment. As he'd done often since learning Lucius Malfoy at one point wanted to marry Marley Prewett, Percy imagines him as his father. Does Draco walk next to Lucius with ease, or does he too feel like an ugly toad waddling after an elegant swan? Lucius' office is not quite as grand as Fudge's, but it is luxurious and large, which is particularly interesting considering that he does not hold an official position with the ministry. Apparently being a lord is credential enough. Percy looks around the room, outfitted in tasteful and doubtlessly expensive wood furniture, and wonders if the keys have been handed down father to son for decades. Lucius settles behind his desk and then raises an eyebrow at Percy, who starts suddenly and hastens to take the seat opposite. Sitting with Narcissa in the lovely, light-filled east parlor of her home, talking lightly of gossip and manners and art, is very different from sitting opposite Lord Malfoy in the center of the ministry. Percy must tread carefully. "My wife tells me you are a talented artist." Percy straightens and smiles. "Lady Malfoy is very generous," he says, aiming for a laugh. Lucius looks unamused. "You wish to be a portrait artist?" Possibly. Did Lucius bring him here merely to quiz him on his career aspirations? It is a rather fascinating blend of potions and transfiguration, you see. "Yes, of course," Lucius responds. "Severus mentioned you were quite the scholar. Not many young Gryffindors are willing to brave the dungeons for information." Percy swallows. "Well, knowledge is power," he offers weakly. Lucius clasps his hand over the head of his cane and looks intently at Percy. "If you are the type of boy Severus believes you to be, then I do not imagine you will waste your time painting portraits. Tell me, Mr. Weasley, what is it you wish to do with your talent?" The problem is, of course, that Percy has no bloody idea what he wants to do, save for the conspicuous exception of wanting to kill the Dark Lord. He tries to take a breath to cool the nerves fluttering in his chest and stomach. "It's just a job interview, isn't it?" "Well, not quite, but pretending so calms him. I have many interests," he says, trying to sit even straighter. "Magic, knowledge, information. I do believe knowledge brings power, and at my age, I must gain both in equal measure." "Indeed," Lucius says noncommittally. "Yet you turned down a prestigious apprenticeship in order to work at the ministry." "Malfoy, if I may be blunt, I enter this realm, this arena, if you will, at a disadvantage," Percy says, meeting Lucius' eyes. He's not any more embarrassed to say this to Lucius than he was to say the same to Narcissa. The difference in their social standings is so great that it would be the greater shame to ignore it. "I do not have contacts that are willing to help me, or insights into how our society operates. Scholarship is but one type of knowledge. Politics is quite another," Lucius agrees. "So I take it you are not as easily swayed as the rest of your family." Percy feels his back moisten with sweat. "If you are speaking of Harry Potter, then I do believe myself to be more critical of him than my family," he says carefully. "Potter is just a boy. I do not believe he necessarily acts with malice, but I do believe he is being led blindly by those more." He trails off. "Intentional," Lucius offers dryly. "I hear you provided Madame Umbridge with invaluable insights into the weaknesses, shall we say, of Hogwarts." "Hogwarts could be great," Percy says, on more solid ground now that they have moved from speaking of Harry Potter. "In many ways, Hogwarts is great, but I believe those ways are entrenched in our tradition and survive despite, not because of, current decisions made by those in power. A proper wizarding education is one of our birthrights, and I believe to deprive us of that is a crime." Lucius Malfoy does not like Dumbledore. Percy does not like Dumbledore. There is no need to speak of dark lords or dark magic or anything else controversial. On this one topic, they can agree with equanimity. "If I may be so bold, Mr. Weasley, what is it that you seek?" Lucius asks, more intently now, gripping the head of his cane tightly. "I'm sorry." Percy asks to give himself more time. Money, power, respect, all of these are answers he cannot give to Lucius. "I can see you are acting intentionally," Lucius says with a hint of impatience. But your motives remain unclear. Oughtn't they? Percy responds. I cannot think of why I would want my motivations to be more obvious at the present moment. Lucius' lips twitch. Touché, Mr. Weasley, and if it is knowledge you seek for now, I believe I have some that would be of interest to you. He snaps his fingers, and a large, heavy tome flies from one of the bookshelves and settles slowly onto his desk. Percy looks at it and then double takes. Magic of the Blood, it says, in intensely curling letters, silver on top of deep blue leather, nearly black. The book is clearly old, but in pristine condition. You may borrow this. Percy looks up. What's the catch? Loyalty, service, knowledge. Quite frankly, Mr. Weasley, I see dozens of bright young men every year seeking fame and glory in the ministry, Lucius says, answering his unasked question. Many of them prove to be disappointments to me. I merely wish to see whether you will be the same. The book, Percy finds when he pursues it later that night, is very old, at least 700 years, judging by some of the arcane references. Luckily, Percy is proficient in the poorly spelled English-Latin blend that warlocks typically used at the time, since he had carefully studied it in his first year, correctly foreseeing he'd have to look through many such books for information. It is also very, very dark, even for a time period characterized by a loose interpretation of magical morality. But it is also very interesting. Percy leafs through an entire chapter detailing the difference between Muggle and wizarding blood, and finds to his surprise that many of the conclusions are well-reasoned. Magic is in the blood. He's sure of it, even if he doesn't know exactly what, and it would be foolish to try and pretend there is no difference between Muggles and wizards. Once you accept that difference, is it really so preposterous to assume there are differences between purebloods and half-bloods? He looks up at the portrait of Tom, face frozen into a haughty blankness. He just needs to fill in some small surface-level details, and he'll be finished. The entire process was surprisingly easy. Too easy, he would say, if he did not have the necessary command on his magic to recognize that it was guiding his hand, pulling from his memory, filling in the gaps that his skill, or lack of, was wont to leave. Tom wanted to come back. Dear Professor Snape, I have discovered a rather interesting variant of the pepper-up potion that I believe has the ability to triple its efficacy, particularly with repeated usage. I found that replacing the oil of peppermint with its close cousin, oil of thyme, had a significant increase in the level of steam produced with one dose. Furthermore, the addition, when brewed in a cauldron painted with life-giving runes, created a potion demonstrably stronger, suggesting smaller doses could be used, thereby increasing the yield of a single batch. I find brewing it in parallel 5 times over to be the most effective strategy. With your permission, I am humbly requesting permission to visit you on the following Hogsmeade weekend to demonstrate my proposed enhancements. Yours sincerely, Percival Weasley Pruett *, no bloody response from Snape, so he writes to Umbridge, and she promptly invites him to take tea with her in Hogwarts the following Friday, instead of meeting her in her office at the Ministry. Typical. October 1995, Percy spends 3 very unpleasant hours translating Umbridge's notes, at times incoherent, into concise and rather damning reports to be submitted to the minister at the first opportunity. Percy can't help himself. He adds several of his own comments. He knows the inspections likely sum to nothing. He's only trying to befriend Umbridge so he can learn a bit more about what's happening with Fudge and at Hogwarts. But the professors at Hogwarts really ought to know their shortcomings and work to improve them, particularly now. Such a pleasure to work with someone so capable, she sighs at the end of the period. Some of the children here are so difficult. Even with repeated detentions, they insist on absolutely shocking behavior. I do not find detentions to be a particularly effective deterrent for those unconcerned with their records, Percy replies, thinking at least of the twins. And as those tend to be the ones causing mischief, it is a difficult conundrum. You're right, of course, she says thoughtfully. You've got to make them meaningful, don't you? He leaves her contemplating various punishment methods and navigates swiftly to Snape's office, taking the opportunity to practice his continuous self-transfiguration. Not that it matters. He does not pass anyone in the hallways that would have cause to give him a second glance, though he does manage to darken his hair wordlessly, so the practice is not entirely for waste. It is apparent even from the doorway that Snape is in one of those moods where he reminds Percy of a cauldron simmering over a tightly controlled flame. Percy hesitates. Without looking up, Snape sighs irritably through his nose. "What?" "I convinced Umbridge to let me visit Hogwarts," says Percy in a rush. Snape goes back to whatever he was writing. Evidently, Percy shifts his weight on each foot and then says, "I thought we might do the portrait potion. The painting is done." Snape doesn't raise his head from the parchment, but Percy knows from the way his hand has stilled that he has Snape's attention. "Was it not clear from my letter?" Snape takes a second to respond, as if Percy's letter had made so little of a dent on his memory that he can barely recall its contents. "Subterfuge is not one of your strengths, Weasley," Percy forges on. "Well, I finished it last week. It is adequate. I believe so." Percy thinks of Tom's painted eyes and then nods more confidently. "It is." Snape sets down his quill and looks at Percy steadily, meeting his gaze for the first time. "You are to keep it in your vault and access it infrequently." "Yes, sir," Percy says automatically. Then he winces. He's an adult twice over, and Snape is no longer his professor. He always means to establish a more equal relationship between them, yet somehow he never quite succeeds. "I do not need yet another reckless teenager laying waste to carefully set plans. You do realize that I am barely 16 years younger than you in my current state. And if you add the extra 8 I've lived in this life, it brings our gap down to merely 3, right?" Percy says acerbedly, and not for the first time. "I am not a child, Severus, even if I look it to you. We are peers." Snape wordlessly summons a large, heavily fortified vial. It hangs in front of Percy, and he's struck by the way the potion hisses and froths, even contained within the crystal. You completed it." Snape looks faintly amused. "What, you thought I would wait so we may do it together?" "Well, yes," Percy wants to say, but it suddenly sounds incredibly childish. They are at war. Just because Percy had been looking forward to some semblance of normalcy, the intimacy that used to steal into their extra tutelage, doesn't mean that he should have expected Snape to be anything but focused. "No," he says instead. His smile is probably unconvincing, but he tries for it nevertheless. "Of course not. It requires only the diadem." Percy winces and reveals, "I took a vow to not destroy a Horcrux unless Tom ordered me to do so." Snape gives him a disgruntled glare, but does not bother to chastise him. "I'm not convinced this will destroy the diadem," Snape says, before he sighs and adds, "I will be at your apartment tomorrow night precisely at 11 at night. Be ready. You know where I live." The look Snape sends his way causes Percy's neck to prickle with unease, but his words are relatively benign. "Do you feel 19 or 31? 32, Percy corrects, for his birthday had just passed at the beginning of August. He exhales and pinches the bridge of his nose under his glasses. "Honestly, I do not know what I feel, how I feel. Some days I do feel very much like a teenager, and others weary," Snape says quietly, as if you have already lived one life and cannot imagine living another. They meet each other's gaze silently, then Snape clears his throat. "You have not been asked to join the Order," comments Snape silkily. "Not quite to plan, is it?" Percy scowls. He knows Snape well enough to know his casual insinuations stem frequently from habit, not malice, but he can admit the Order is a sore subject for him. "I plan to not join," he says obstinately. "There is use for me at the Ministry. Umbridge trusts me, Fudge trusts me, and yet Dumbledore does not. Tell me, Weasley, do you even know of what the Order guards in the Ministry?" Percy had not known the Order was guarding anything at all. His expression must have said as much, for Snape begins to look darkly gleeful. "I must thank you for the advance warning of his return, but one wonders why you still believe you have a part to play in this." "I do have a part. Chatting with dear Tom." Albus knows of the Horcruxes, Weasley, or at the least he suspects. "I do not know precisely what he is doing, but I imagine he is getting closer to the truth every day. The Order is on guard at the Ministry. Even Moody is mobilizing the Auras, those of whom he trusts. And you, Weasley—" "I will find the Horcruxes," insists Percy. "What is the Order guarding?" "Something the Dark Lord wants very much," answers Snape. "I shall tell you if you tell me why Dumbledore would so guard something so obvious, and in a way that should make it apparent to the Dark Lord that it is valuable. A trap, I suppose." Percy thinks of that horrible night when he realized he'd been completely, terribly wrong. He wants to prove to the Ministry that Tom is back. Snape shrugs, but on him the motion is controlled and almost delicate. Albus believes that, while Potter must be the one to defeat the Dark Lord, he might be able to weaken him. Where is he now? Do you go to him? Snape abruptly looks tired again, any of the excitement from before sliding off him like dark oil. Frequently, he says. Far too frequently. Percy gapes a little. For all he knew that Snape is a spy, he hadn't quite imagined that Snape would be frequently speaking with the Dark Lord. And what is he like? Snape meets his gaze. Determined. Powerful. He is for now obsessed with Potter with the prophecy. I fear we have little time before he begins to act more broadly. 1 year, agrees Percy, thinking of before. So make your Tom speak. Keep researching the Horcruxes. Do what you must. I have not the time to devote to their discovery as I would have liked. Between your minister and Albus and the Dark Lord, and Potter's infernal dedication to the art of trouble-making, I cannot babysit you as you'd like, Weasley. Percy opens his mouth to rise to the bait, and then snaps it shut. Things for Snape cannot be any easier than they are for Percy, and arguing with his only ally would do nothing but introduce tension into an already fraught relationship. Come tonight, he says simply. Thank you for your help, Severus. Cedric had invited him for a drink in Hogsmeade that evening, which had made Percy feel a bit better about his impulsive letter to inform the other wizard that he would be around. Percy is not sure why Cedric would like to spend extra time with him, but perhaps Cedric is as curious about what is happening in the real world as Percy is about what is happening at Hogwarts. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement of information, nothing more, though Percy has to admit privately to himself he is excited to have actual plans on this Friday night. Certainly, it justifies his taking an entire day off for these errands. Still, Cedric had said he would be free only in the evening, so with the benefit of the links, Percy makes it from Snape's office to the village with plenty of time to spare, even after stopping by Myrtle's bathroom to update her on the latest news. He purchases some candy. Mathilda has a bit of a sweet tooth and new quills, and even peeks inside the old second-hand bookstore that had served him so well in school. That bloody bint up at the castle confiscated half my fare, the proprietor complains to Percy when Percy, surprised, inquires after several books and finds them all out of supply. I've barely enough left to eke a living out of, and that's only if people are brave enough to come and buy them under her nose. Dark arts, she says. Is it a crime to sell books on magic? I'm not handing you a wand and telling you to start working your way through them, assigning homework like a bloody professor. It's not a crime to read. Percy purchases a few books on the history of magical Britain and its creatures, the maze still top of mind, and slips out before the proprietor can try and lodge a more formal complaint. Cedric is late to their agreed-upon meeting at the Three Broomsticks, which is not a great start to this partnership, but Percy tries not to let it bother him unduly. He orders a hot tea and sips it, reflecting on his conversation with Myrtle. They had only the time for a quick chat, most of which was filled with her impassioned hatred of Dolar's Umbridge. Her reign has lasted under 2 months, yet to hear Myrtle tell it, she's completely upended the very fabric of the school itself. Percy pointed out that the fabric of the school must have been rather tenuous if a single witch could tear it within months, which had incited Myrtle to sniff angrily and dive through the floor. Percy examines his feelings about aiding Umbridge, and then decides, as he often does, that he feels very reconciled to his choices. If the worst that comes of his ministry reports is the pampered Hogwarts population having an unpleasant professor, it will be a price well paid to be positioned so close to the minister. "Hullo, Perce," says Cedric, startling Percy. Percy spins and finds his old classmate looking unfairly tanned and fit from all the gardening he's doing so heroically. Percy isn't quite sure they are on levels of familiarity high enough to warrant Perce, but Cedric is a Hufflepuff, so perhaps the standards are different. "Hello, Cedric." He squints at Cedric, who has a bit of a flush around his cheeks. "Started already." Cedric grins easily and taps the side of his nose. "Just came from an exciting meeting. I'll tell you all about it. You may want to disguise yourself a tad. Wouldn't do for me to conspire so openly with a ministry employee." Percy eyes Cedric doubtfully, but waits patiently as Cedric orders 2 butter beers, taking the opportunity to once again practice his self-transfiguration. "Your transfiguration is excellent," Cedric stays admiringly, glancing over Percy's new look. "I'd take you for a metamorph magus if I hadn't gone to school with Tonks. Why didn't you stay for your apprenticeship?" "I may come back to it," says Percy defensively. He'd forgotten, too, that Cedric and Tonks would have known each other, been in the same house, if only for a year or two. "McGonagall's given me an open offer." "Well, I dare say you'll deserve it whenever you get tired of the ministry," replies Cedric agreeably. "It would be fun to have you around the castle. The professors are nice, but they get a bit dull. I end up spending a fair bit of time with my house, which I think is traditionally looked down upon. But I've been hearing all the gossip. The students are not happy, Percy. Umbridge has them learning penmanship rather than spells." "Really?" Percy asks, startled. He'd known that the students disliked the ministry-approved curriculum, but he had assumed it would involve the standard set of spells and defenses for each year. "And it's Ron's owl year, too." Cedric nods soberly. "I've offered my services in a way. I know it's unorthodox, and you're a bit of a rule follower, but you know more magic than most people I could ask. I wanted to get your thoughts on the plan." "What plan?" Percy asks cautiously. Cedric grins again, the mischievous in the curve of his smile erasing any anxiety that may have been crinkling the corners of his eyes. "What if I told you that today was the first meeting of a new club to learn defense under that old toad's nose?" Percy cannot say that he really disagrees with the plan that Cedric outlines for him, but he does not think it is optimal either. Harry, a defense instructor. Even with Hermione's memorization of the library and Ron's stubborn loyalty, Percy cannot imagine that Harry would be able to create an effective lesson plan and also handle a club of impetuous teenagers. But at the same time, Percy knows more than most the importance of minimizing the gaps in one's own education. Hogwarts has not had a competent defense teacher in all the time Percy was there, with the potential exception of Lupin, who missed so many classes he hardly ought to count. Even if Umbridge were teaching a proper ministry-approved curriculum, the students should take it upon themselves to train themselves for whatever may come. Even the average wizard has creatures in their garden and ought to know how to protect themselves from harm. What Percy objects to is how casually the whole endeavor is laid out. Cedric seems not to think anything of telling him the plan in the middle of the three broomsticks, though Percy is quick to raise a privacy ward. The students met openly in the Hog's Head, and to hear Cedric tell it, they all but signed their names to a public document stating their complicity. "I can't tell you more than that, I'm afraid," Cedric says, finally realizing there may be some need for discretion. "I think Hermione jinxed the parchment we all signed. I could sense it when I got closer to it. I think it'll curse me if I tell too much." "What will your role be?" Percy questions, ignoring the issue of a jinxed parchment for now. He really ought to have words with Hermione. Enacting retribution is not the same thing as preventing perfidy, and she really should know that. If Harry is the leader, Cedric shrugs one shoulder and exhales slowly. "I dunno, to be honest," he says, and his voice is suddenly low and serious. "On one hand, it's a bit of a lark, training under Umbridge's nose. On the other hand, you and I both know that these kids will need to know how to defend themselves. So you believe Harry, then, do you not?" Percy wavers and then leans in close, dropping his voice. "Cedric, the ministry is going through a lot of effort to discount what Harry is saying, more effort than just Fudge trying to save his own skin." "Someone murdered my father," says Cedric coldly. "Someone in the ministry, I'd wager. Someone in the ministry stunned me so that Harry would have to face the Dark Lord alone. Someone in the ministry is sabotaging an entire set of Hogwarts graduates, right when they need them the most." "So what are you suggesting I do, Percy?" "Someone in the ministry is watching you all," Percy snaps back. "Someone in the ministry is going to be watching you all very closely, and at least for now, a lot of someones in the ministry have the power to make all of your lives very miserable." He pauses, chest heaving, but Cedric isn't flaring into anger like Percy would expect, merely watching Percy with dark, solemn eyes. Percy releases his own anger into the wind and is able to say, "For the students, for Harry and the rest. They know of the dangers that lurk outside the doors of Hogwarts, but they don't really think about them very much. I'd guarantee all those kids that signed their names to the page are thinking more of their owls and their rebellion and their boy who lived than of their safety. If you're going to do this, do it right. Help them train for what's out there, and by Merlin's beard, don't do it in such an obvious way that you'll be shut down before you can do anything of use." Cedric nods. I want you to help, Percy. Help. I know you're in a difficult situation, and I don't judge you for it. I don't know how you put up with Crouch and Fudge and the rest, but someone's got to do it, and I'd rather it be you than someone I don't know at all. But you forget I was only 2 years behind you in school, Percy. I've been hearing stories from your dad about how skilled you are with magic since you went off at 11 and got yourself in advanced tutelage, an honor they later denied me, I might add. I know defense, but I don't know magic, not like you do. For a second, Percy does not say anything, searching for some meaning in Cedric's eyes that seem to elude him. Then he nods once and says shortly, I will. Cedric leans forward and grips Percy's forearm, ignoring the flinch that travels through Percy's body. And I will look after your siblings like they were my own, he breathes quietly. And maybe between the two of us, we can keep them all alive. Dear Cedric, hope all is well at Hogwarts. I hear the students are giving Madame Umbridge quite a difficult time. I suppose that's what you expect for a school so poorly maintained. I thought some more on what we last spoke. I, of course, am no doula myself, and with the strength of our aura department, I shan't expect the average adult wizard to need many of these spells. But if you are interested in tailoring your apprenticeship to include protective magics, I have some suggestions. Please see enclosed a tentative course of study, and feel free to let me know if any of the relevant parties disagree. I would stress that shield charms, nonverbal casting, and developing an instinctive response to dangerous situations are more useful than any individually flashy spells. An awareness of the need for discretion is equally paramount. If you do run into Harry Potter, please impress upon him that the Ministry grows tired of his little escapades. He ought to be studying for his owls, rather than inciting violence. Knowledge is key, and perhaps some scholarly pursuits will inform him as to the danger inherent in spreading such tales. Percy is about to sign his name in his best ostentatious calligraphy when he hears the faintest pop of apparition outside his door. He really only heard it because he'd heavily enchanted the entire flat, including the hallway outside. This particular enchantment amplifies sounds, which could be quite annoying when his next-door neighbor brought another paramour home, but otherwise helped Percy feel more secure. It takes him a second to process the sound as apparition, but the moment he does, he freezes in place, his wand sliding into his hand. Snape's been compromised, he thinks, inhaling sharply. It's still an hour away from when Snape had said he'd arrive, and nobody knows where he lives. He flicks his wand at the portrait, conjuring a cloth to cover it. Another flick and he's disillusioned himself, a spell he's become quite comfortable with in recent years. Then he creeps quietly to the door. After the Triwizard Tournament, Percy installed televisor charms on his door, inspired by the small, square monitoring charms he'd seen in the wards. This serves useful now. With a silent tap of his wand, a small square in his door shivers and turns transparent. A hooded figure is outside, leveling his wand directly at the door. Percy freezes, panic spreading like cracks of ice over his veins. The figure casts a web of light over the door, but Percy's wards hold up. Think, Percy counsels himself. He needs to stun the figure, but he can't do so from inside. He can't merely hope his wards hold, since he needs to know who is trying to break into his flat and how they found him. His flat is a standard indoor apartment. The door faces a hallway, and there aren't any windows he could try and lean out of to aim at the figure. Percy, one eye on the televisor spell, decides quickly. He will be ready once the figure breaks in. He weaves a shield of wards, small and localized to his person, to protect against spells and hexes, and even physical harm. He's just putting the finishing touches on the web when his door bounces open and the figure glides inside. Stupefy, Percy says immediately. The figure parries it without sound and returns a spell of his own, honing in on Percy's location despite the fact that Percy is still invisible. Percy blocks it and sends a volley of spells back, giving him enough time to wrap a spell around the entire set of wards, hopefully allowing them to travel with him. He makes for the left side of the room, trying to run on quiet feet, trusting his wards to block any attack from behind. But when he turns, the figure turns with him, and the next spell out of his wand once again flies directly at Percy's chest. How is he tracking Percy? Annoyed, Percy casts a dark spell that fills the entire room with blinding lights, and then another that causes the floor and walls to shake with an impossibly loud siren, the latter taught to him by Nymphadora Tonks and meant to be used for crowd control. He follows it up with several spells meant to obfuscate, fog and smoke and flashing lights. Enough, the figure says sternly, and through the haze Percy sees him slash his wand in an attempt to cut through Percy's spells. It doesn't work. Percy may not be a particularly adept dueler, but he is a powerful wizard, and has nothing better to do than hunt a dark lord and invent spell variants. The figure pushes back his hood to reveal a distinctly unimpressed Severus Snape. "End it, Weasley. Not until you prove your identity," Percy yells over the din. "I know your secret and that of the ghost Myrtle," Snape replies irritably. "Do you wish me to shout it from the rooftops? Why are you here? To finish the bloody portrait potion, which you can't do to an idiotic vow that you took," Snape replies, aggrieved. He slashes his wand again, more violently than the last, and the wail cuts out abruptly. Percy ends the remaining spells, though he trains his wand on Snape still. "Why are you early?" "I wanted to see your defenses," Snape replies. "The door was pitiable, barely kept me out. This strategy, hardly tenable. If you see a Death Eater at your door, you hide your things and run, do you understand? You're not nearly capable enough to fight a skilled Death Eater, and we cannot have you die before the end." Percy lowers his wand, smarting from the admonishment. "How could you tell where I was?" "You layered so many wards around you that anyone with any measure of sophistication could sense the accumulation of magic," Snape says, walking further into the apartment. His eyes take in every detail, and though Percy had scrupulously cleaned every room as if his mother were the one visiting, Percy suddenly feels sure that his entire place is a disgrace. "That and you forgot to ward against sound. I could hear you breathing. Damn, there was always something." "Well, you're here now," Percy says, resolving to spend the entire weekend bolstering his defenses and devising a strategy for quickly fleeing. He'll need provisions, a way to hide all evidence without seeming like he hid all evidence, a place to stay, a way to monitor what was happening at his flat in his absence, perhaps a store of gold somewhere that is not Gringotts, and an emergency way to contact his family and/or Snape and/or McGonagall if needed. To begin, let's get started. Snape nods brusquely and produces a large silver cauldron from somewhere in his cavernous robes. "We are to use silver," he lectures, clearing a space on Percy's rug and lighting an everlasting fire. Percy flinches, but does not say anything as the flames dance just above his rather expensive rug. "Why? The diadem is silver," he replies automatically. "We wish the potion to accept the base of silver from the diadem as merely an infusion of strength," Snape confirms, setting the cauldron to hover above the flames. He summons the potion from where Percy carefully kept it on the kitchen counter and directs a small but steady stream into the cauldron. "I modified the recipe for transport, so we need now to aerate it and allow it to simmer, breaking down the preservation and returning to its natural state." Percy nods and positions himself closer as Snape explains the theory behind the potion. The problem, Snape lectures, is twofold. Firstly, that the potion takes the traditional resurrection base of blood and bone. Similar, interestingly, to the potion he used to return, with Potter's blood and his father's bone. They, of course, have only the diadem, which is in itself the second problem. I believe the diadem's protective properties will transfer to the portrait. We extract only the soul. This is why only a potion would work, and not a spell. We ask the soul to permeate the entire mixture instead of attempting to isolate it. Percy nods again. They've both gone through the theory independently, of course, but it calms Percy to hear it all again out loud. It's not quite the same as preparing the brew with Snape, but it nevertheless calms and steadies him. While Snape had been talking, the mixture has become impossibly hot. Snape directs the flames to actually wrap around the entire cauldron, so the steam rising from the top is enough to heat the entire flat. Percy is dripping with sweat already, and they have not even begun the difficult part. "You are to attempt a reverse transformation," Snape tells Percy, who has been practicing that very thing for the last few weeks. "If your vow prevents it, you shall back away at once and allow me to step in. Now, we shall proceed. In 5, 4, 3, 2, Ammonophora," Percy incants, holding his wand steady on the diadem. He's become intimately familiar with its component parts, and as it hovers in the air, he goes through them one by one. First, the rubies break off, and then the diamonds, and the emeralds, and then each of the other gems in turn. He's been able to confirm these were added later to the diadem, likely by an overzealous heir, and so do not technically need to be part of the potion. He directs them with his wand to the side, where Snape carefully wraps each one in a soft cloth. That task complete, Snape begins murmuring an incantation of his own as he stirs, preparing for the rest of the diadem. Percy sends another surge through the spell. Next is the elaborate detailing on the tiara. This slides off it and into the cauldron like icing melting from a cake. Each spiked tip breaks off, and then the entire backing. When Percy is left with just a silver circlet, he pushes again with his magic, and the diadem begins to shake violently in the air. The Horcrux does not want it to change form, but Percy forces it with all of his strength, and it begins to flip through forms petulantly, first a small dagger, then a hand-held mirror, then a long, pointed wand. Ammonophora, Percy says through gritted teeth. Come on, Tom, he commands it. I need you to speak to me. The diadem hovers in the air as if considering Percy, and then abruptly melts into the cauldron, the molten silver oozing into the rest of the potion. Away, Snape orders, and Percy collapses into his armchair, feeling exhausted. Snape shifts until his entire body is over the cauldron, still encased in flames, and leans into the steam as if he's inhaling it. For the first time, Percy sees Snape truly engrossed in his work, responding to minuscule changes in the consistency or heat or color or smell with the tiniest, most delicate of changes. He whispers to the cauldron the entire time, too low for Percy to hear whether he is incanting magic or merely speaking to the brew. Finally, he sits back on his heels and allows a rare smile to cross his face. It's done. And the Horcrux. You certainly did not destroy it during your transfiguration, Snape muses, giving the cauldron an affectionate stir. Our simplest solution is to destroy the portrait completely once we have the information we need. Percy nods, and then waves his wand to uncover the portrait. He busies himself by fetching the supplies he'll need to apply the potion while Snape surveys the portrait. Surprisingly well executed, Snape murmurs in a soft voice, surprisingly devoid of derision, and he reaches with one hand as if to touch Tom's youthful face. Then he pulls his hand away violently and turns on Percy. I hope whatever errors you may do not drive him mad and consign our efforts to be for naught. Percy doesn't respond. He hopes that too. The wand-tipped brushes are elegant, their handles covered with intricate lines and yet smooth to the touch. He'd ordered brushes with the same core and wood as his wand, and when he picks them up, he feels a shadow of the same thrum that ran through his body his first time at Ollivander's. Oaken dragon heartstring, 12.5 inches long. I have to return soon, Snape says irritably from behind him. And time now, Weasley. I have to concentrate, Percy replies chidingly. The potion hisses in the cauldron, but stills when he dips his brush in it. The potion is clear. When he lifts the brush, he cannot tell anything is on the bristles save for water. After years of occlumency practice, not to mention his animagus transformation, meditation comes easily to Percy. It takes him only a second of deep breathing to calm the riotous turmoil in his mind and focus only on the task in front of him. Tom's face is frozen. Percy looks at it and thinks of the memories of Tom he still carries in his head, his sly smile and lofty retorts. For everything that Tom is now, he was once a 16-year-old boy, and Percy can admit in the detached privacy of his mind that he rather liked Tom at times, and he believes Tom may even have liked him too. And Tom, as cruel and imperious and commanding as he is, was not unreasonable at 16. He'd admitted himself that he cared far more deeply for power and respect than blood. This Tom may still be swayed to give up the secrets of his Horcruxes, since this Dark Lord is mad and erratic and dangerous both to society and to Tom's vision of himself. Only when Percy has firmly fixed this impression of Tom in his head does he lower his hand and layer a stroke of the potion on the bottom corner of the painting. Nothing happens. Percy feels Snape shifting behind him, but tries to ignore him. What he needs, of course, is magic. He'd been so caught up in the first part of the process that he'd forgotten what Mr. Barrington said. It is rather like the animagus transformation, or at least like that first time. Percy breathes evenly and becomes aware of his magic crawling on his skin, raising the little hairs all over his body, flowing down his arms, and into his fingertips. He can almost imagine the tips of the brush sparking with gold. He thinks of Tom, of nights in his Hogwarts dormitory, hesitantly reaching out with his magic as Tom guides him to a greater awareness of his magic. Then he dips his brush again and drags it across the same square. This time something sparks inside of him. Without hesitating, he does it again and again, thinking of Tom, thinking of his magic. He covers the entire canvas methodically from bottom to top, not flinching even when he sweeps his brush over the dried paint of Tom's face. Only when he paints the top left corner does he pause, realizing belatedly that his face is covered with beaded sweat and his lips are dry. Fascinating, Snape says in a hushed voice, the reminder of his presence making Percy jump. You entered a trance. Potion masters are, of course, familiar with this type of continuous casting, but I did not know it applied to portraiture as well. Percy smiles weakly. He watches as the last of the potion fades into the portrait. So you admit I did something talented? Well, that remains to be seen, replies Snape, some of his customary tartness returning to his voice. He steps to the side so he will be out of the portrait's direct line of sight. Wake it. Percy takes another deep breath and then takes out his wand. Animare, he commands, and after a torturous second, Tom Riddle blinks open painted blue eyes. Percy inhales sharply, and even Snape to the side seems to flinch at the sight, judging by the rustle of his robes. Tom blinks again. Then he stretches, a bit like a cat, and looks around him in some interest. He takes in the bookshelves of painted books behind him, the table with writing supplies, the leather couch half hidden by his body, the ornate globe on his desk, and lastly, the green and silver accents on the rug beneath his feet, all carefully chosen and rendered by Percy. Percy holds his breath. If Tom doesn't accept his surroundings, his reality, he could be driven mad. Tom turns to him and his face is cold and commanding. Where am I? Who are you? Where is my wand? Percy freezes in indecision. What if the Dark Lord did sense the portrait and is spying on him right now through his eyes? That would be impossible, he counsels himself. Who are you? Percy worries his lip and then decides to act as if he is being observed. He bows shallowly and murmurs, My lord. Tom peers down at him and then frowns. I do know you, he says after a second. I remember you. From the diary, the diadem. You do. This Tom was made from the diadem. Percy waits in silence as Tom puzzles through something in his mind. Does Tom remember him because he interacted with the diadem, or because the diadem makes Tom wise? How did I die? Tom says abruptly. Percy watches him reach for his wand and then come up short. Percy had not painted him one, of course. He did not know what Tom would be able to do with a painted wand, but he would not risk it. He has thought about what to say to Tom obsessively ever since the idea for the portrait first passed through his mind, and he had decided long ago that raw honesty, as much as possible, would be the most effective tool. Tom trusts very few people, and he'll be expecting Percy to lie. You may want to sit, says Percy, taking his own advice by summoning a chair and positioning it in front of the portrait. He moves the portrait after a second so that they will be at eye level. Snape is entirely motionless, watching with dark, inscrutable eyes. Aside from a brief glance in his direction, Percy ignores him. Tom's expression does not change, nor does he sit. You are a Horcrux, says Percy bluntly. A damaged one. I repaired you and transferred you to this form so that we may communicate. Tom still does not sit, but something flickers over his face too quickly for Percy to identify it. A Horcrux, he repeats, his voice heavy with skepticism. Those are but myths. Your first Horcrux was a diary, which you left with Abraxas Malfoy, Percy continues doggedly. I believe you also made Hufflepuff's famed cup into a Horcrux, though I can't be certain. I found your diary and spoke to it, and together we released the basilisk like you did 50 years ago when you killed Myrtle Warren. Now Tom does sit, though the graceful way he perches alertly on the painted chair suggests he could spring off at any moment. But I am not dead. This will be the part that is difficult. Percy does not know if Tom believes him, likely not yet, but he hopes he has concluded that Percy could be at least a reliable source of information, if not a true ally. Yes and no, says Percy slowly. He sighs and then says, as if he's dreading saying it, 15 years ago you were defeated by an infant boy. Nobody knows how, though I theorize the mother set up blood wards triggered to activate with her own sacrifice. Regardless, your body disintegrated and you were left as a shade, untethered. Everyone believed you were dead. You spent the next 14 years as a shade trying to find a body, and then 4 months ago you managed to resurrect yourself. Tom leans forward, his eyes alight. And I believe it went wrong, Percy says. He bites his lip and summons a sketch he had done of Voldemort's new form based on his recollections from the previous timeline. He holds it up in silence. You lie, Tom hisses, much like his diary self had at the same revelation, but Percy shakes his head. I found your diary, like I said, and I told you what I told you now. You studied it, and you concluded that you split your soul too many times, that you were unstable. Before you were defeated by the infant, it was rumored a dark ritual had made you mad. We planned to find the Horcruxes and combine them, resurrecting you in a form that would be stronger, closer to your true self. Tom stands, towering over Percy even in his frame. You lie, he repeats, his face twisted in hatred. He does not, Snape says, and Percy nearly jumps out of his chair. Snape gives Percy a withering glance and steps into Tom's line of sight. I know you, Tom says, barely audibly, looking at Snape intently. Snape sweeps an impressive bow. My name is Severus Snape, my lord. I joined your ranks as a Death Eater in 1978. I discovered Mr. Weasley's intentions when he was at Hogwarts under my care, and have been helping him ever since. I just returned from an audience with you earlier this evening, my lord. He ordered me to, well, my lord, he ordered me to poison another of your followers for being delayed to answer the call. My lord, he's not thinking clearly. He has been in this form for nearly 5 months and shows no interest in consolidating power, nor recruiting more followers, nor even growing back to his full strength. My lord, I would never entertain disloyal thoughts, but I believe we need you to take his place. Tom looks evenly at Snape, as if these revelations did not upset him, but Percy knows Tom, or at least knew a younger version of him, and knows Tom would be flattered to hear of this. The Dark Lord as he is today is a threat to Tom, someone to compete with or share the spotlight with. No wonder the Dark Lord did not make his later Horcrux capable of communication or agency. He would know he had the capacity to betray his own soul, given the opportunity. So you are a traitor. Never, my lord, Snape says smoothly. My lord, if I may, you recruited me personally out of Hogwarts nearly 2 decades ago. Even being in your presence was intoxicating. This version of you is a mere shade of what you once were. I believe it is true loyalty to bring you back as you were, so you may continue what you once started. Tom purses his lips. How do I know what you say is true? I included books in your library I thought you may find useful, Percy pipes up helpfully. Histories of the war, as well as some treatises on dark magic your younger self recommended to me. Tom strolls over to the bookshelves as if he is merely checking references on a school paper and takes out a slim volume. This had been a particularly nifty piece of magic while painting the portrait, and he hadn't been sure it would work, but there seems to be words on the page. Percy exhales to himself in relief. You will leave me now, Tom commands. We will move you, my lord, to somewhere more secure, Snape says obsequiously. Perhaps a Gringotts vault. No, dismisses Tom. I wish to remain here. I shall not help you if you move me. Percy sees a muscle in Snape's jaw clench, but he merely bows and then waves his wand so the covering falls back over Tom's face. They go into Percy's bedroom, a rather odd experience for him, and Snape wards it tightly. You cannot fall under his thrall, he orders. But as I cannot check in with you frequently, we must devise a way to ensure you are yourself. It is a Horcrux still, Percy confirms, moving past the point of his safety for now. He seems to remember us wearing it. Snape nods consideringly. Limit your interactions. Remember, Mr. Weasley, when he is there he will be observing you carefully. You cannot give him any reason to doubt you. Percy nods, feeling a thrum of excitement ignite. Finally, after so many months of waiting, he has a purpose again, and one in which he will surely excel. Fix your wards, Snape says, and then he disappears without any further comment. Percy collapses in his bed. He will have to rouse himself to fix his wards, of course, but for a second he wants to exult in the luxurious feeling of having completed a goal, of stretching himself with fiendishly complicated magic and excelling at what needs to be done. In a way, he's brought back the Dark Lord, and he will use him to defeat himself.